We can talk about So my name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of this library. I'm very as you know, I'm a massive romance reader. Well, maybe you don't know, but I am a massive romance reader, and CM has really introduced me to monster romance, which is yeah, I mean, I could say there's no words, but we're gonna hear lots of words, right? So I love that you guys are here. I love that you guys love romance. I know some people have traveled a distance to be here, and we're gonna be doing this panel discussion first, and then we'll have a book sale signing, and then if you want to talk to Lillian and Kat for half an hour, just small group discussion, we'll be back here, and CM and I will be here at 2:30 for the same kind of thing. And then, if you're still looking to buy books or chat with authors, then we can pull out more. Yes.
Before we start, are photos allowed?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a hashtag for the event?
Can I say Nina is awesome? Oh wait. What would Monrom?
Monrom.
Yeah,
Monrom. Ashland. Make sure.
2024. There we go.
Monrom Ashland 2024.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Because there will be another one in 2025.
Maybe. I actually have a virtual one coming up in October. So, for those of you who don't want to travel again, it's always happening.
And I am going to actually ask a favor, and I need to start doing this at all of my signing events. I have a really bad habit of I'll do a signing event, I people nonstop for 24 hours, and then I don't check social media for a week. So I miss all of the stories you tag me in. I'll just say, oh, she tagged me in the story, and it's gone. So if you're going to tag me in something, send me a nudge so that I actually get the notification, because I just go into a cave. Yeah. And I want to reshare your posts. I'm not intentionally ignoring them. I'm just literally hiding from all humanity at that point.
Yeah, as someone I call myself an omnivore, it's it's peaks and valleys. It's humans don't talk to me for a week.
Yeah.
And humans don't talk to me.
I'm a very high energy introvert. So when I'm on, I'm 8 cramped up to 11. But when I'm off, do not make eye contact with me unless you want your face ripped off.
Yeah. I guess it must be.
A gentle reminder. Okay, so like I said, panel discussion. I am not going to introduce you because, of course, you all know they're really amazing. But I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves so that we can know who you are and maybe your latest book. So I'm going to start with CM Nascosta.
Oh, hi, I'm CM Nascosta. I am the author of the Camber Creek series. Most of you probably know me from Morning Glory Milking Farm. The OGs know me from Girls Weekend. The next book, my most recent book is, what was my most recent book? Hexanaut? Hexanaut is my most recent book. The next book coming out is going to come out right after I get home, is Letha, which is the next book in the Spider series, in the Cranberry Creek Coven series.
That's right. We're feeling very covetous that it's not out today.
Yeah. I was so hoping I was going to have it out by this week, but 25-year-old episodes of Law and Order, and the first week of school, the first week of ballet, the first week of gymnastics. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything.
That's okay.
Thank you all for being here.
We have a good number of books to choose from. Kat?
Hi, I'm Kat. Kat Kingsley is what I go by in my casual life, but I publish under Kathryn Ann Kingsley. So there's another romance author by Kat Kingsley when I started. And I am known mostly for dark fantasy and villain romance. So villain gets the girl, stays the villain. But I do also dabble. I joke that I'm on a slow escalator ride into monster romance, because the more I write, the more tentacles and interesting shifter monsters show up. So I blame these two because they're a bad influence. Because the more I am their friends, the weirder the attachments become to the gentleman that I write. And for example, the next Fae guy that I'm writing is a spider shifter, and I blame you.
And I'm writing ghosts next year, and I blame you.
Now spiders have 8 arms.
Well, this one only has 7 because he's got trauma. He's been through some. Yeah.
Remember, doors are closed. That's why it's hot in here. And Lillian Lark.
I'm Lillian Lark. I write monster remix. I started with Stalked by the Kraken, and apparently introduced a lot of people to tentacles. They were very surprised with how much they liked them. I'm like, oh, what's not delay? But my most recent book was Haunted by the Dragon, and hopefully in December, next book in the series, which is the Death House monster series, will be out, and that's Married to the Devil. Yeah.
He's got two.
He does.
Handlebars.
All uses that you can think of, or that you guys can think of.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start with just a quick, what got you into writing specifically monster romance? Why monsters? Kat?
The uniqueness that you can, like the fun that you can have with them, it literally is like sky's the limit. It's you can take it in interesting ways, and it's always fun and challenging, and it's, I don't want to say that sometimes writing normal sex scenes can sometimes get a little mundane and you're like, oh, here we are again, everybody. But sometimes it is, sometimes a little bit, oh, here we are again, everybody. And there's just something cool and unique and interesting and exciting about trying to romance a character that is inhuman. And it's like, you have an opportunity with fiction to break mundane barriers. So why not do that? It's like in fiction and books, you can just go wild. So why be boring? You know?
Were you a rabble rouser as a child?
No.
You know she was. Lillian?
I don't think I was a rebel as a child at all. So mine was like mine is very different, where the monster aspect almost came later, because I got a book idea where I was like, oh, like I need a backstory for this one character, and then that turned into a whole book, which ended up being Stalked by the Kraken, where I was like, oh, like she's gonna be a matchmaker, and it's a bathhouse, so maybe it'd be fun to have like a sea monster, because they're very much in like the vein of where they do either have two forms, or they have like a glamored form that they can take and be human. But I was like, and if it's a sea creature, he has tentacles, and I am a huge reader of sci-fi romance, and always there's tentacles as an option for I had like a pause where I was legitimately like, I haven't really seen tentacles done in paranormal romance yet. Like, it's either my ignorance, or like it was not on my radar. I was like, is this gonna be something that people hate? But gladly, I went forward with it, and they did not. It turned out real great. It kicked off. I like monsters, because they do start as characters for me, like initially, and it's just like you get to add these different textures to them. You're like, oh, like this dragon likes to hoard things. So he, like, it would be fun if he had like maybe he had like spattering of scales on his face. Like that would look really awesome. And then eventually he had two dicks, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like let's just like go real hand for this. But it's like you can just add on, and you don't really have as many. It's the limitations are the ones you put on yourself.
Yep.
And it is fun to say like, well, what is a real limitation versus like what's something I want to do. So.
And CM?
I've always been a monster girl, like always. I know I've said this in chats before, like my first movie crush was like Swamp Thing from like the 1982 movie. So I've always been that girl, but I wasn't writing monsters like for a really long time. And I'd actually just come off of a contemporary book that ripped out a part of my soul. And I got feedback on it from an agent to rewrite the first chapter and then send her the full. And I rewrote the first chapter, and then I realized because I rewrote the first chapter, I had to rewrite the second chapter, and then I had to rewrite the third chapter. And by the time I got to the middle of the book, I realized I had ruined my book, and it was so demoralizing. I just had to spin to something that was fun for me. And for me, it's just like monsters is fun. And when I started my Cambric Creek world, those of you who are like the real OGs, you've been following me since like early Tumblr days, because I was posting just like my story frame ideas on Tumblr as like little 10,000 word shorts that would eventually turn into full stories. And everything was just like very light and very sexy and very like sky's the limit, why limit yourself? And then as I started fleshing out the characters, I really started trying to subvert the ideas of like what you expect when you go into these stories sometimes, which is why I wound up with a breeding clinic book that is actually about like family dynamics and not about breeding.
Goodness.
Yeah, it's been like a slippery slope since.
Okay, then. So I was telling the authors that up until this morning, I really didn't have a topic for this discussion, and I decided it's going to be why should how can you have a happily ever after with a monster? And I specifically put monster in quotes because I really want to talk about what makes a monster. Because Kat, you just said something about humanity and being humane or inhumane, and I'm really curious about this topic around monsters. What do we think is monstrous or inhumane? So Lillian, what do you think about that? Like, what do you think is a monster to you?
For me, it's mostly like, oh, since they all start as like people, essentially, it's hard to say like, oh, like what is monsters? Because I think I texture on all these different attributes where like I like them, I think people will like them, I think they work well together. But they don't, like, they're not around in the real world, right? I don't do too many like big betrayals or anything, so it's like it's not like a moral monstrousness. And I do love like the books where the people aren't attracted to each other at all at the beginning, right? And it becomes so much more about like the depth of feeling that you have to another person without that, and then the attraction comes later. Like I feel like I love both of those dynamics where you're like, ooh, gargoyles. Love the 90s series. But then also like these characters are like more than just the fact that they have the capability of not like to be able to not people. Like it's like
They do have stone penises.
yeah, they do.
They do.
Thank you.
In fact, they do.
But it's like a connection of like it doesn't matter what they necessarily look like unless like you're just attracted to that person, right? So
Thank you, Sam.
Repeat the question.
What do you consider to be monstrous?
I just wanted to have like the frame of the question in my head
Yeah.
before I answer this. So I've actually been thinking about this a lot, and because I normally answer this question, I normally say this question is harder for me to answer because the monsters in my series and in my world, they live alongside people, so they're not like considered like ooh monsters in this world. But when I create a character, I come at it from like the same place of like I'm going to come up with the character first, and then I'm going to give them these attributes. And like Lillian said, it's you have to go beyond like, oh, he's a gargoyle and he's got a stone penis and he has a tail and wings and all that.
I can't get too far beyond that.
Well, and see, and I normally answer this question and I say that the humans are really the monsters in my series. But really, I don't think that's the case because we all have the capacity to be monsters to each other. And I think as my series has progressed, like we've seen that more, like everyone, including the monsters, are capable of turning on each other and being prejudiced against each other and holding things against each other. So it starts to become less about the physical attributes of what separates them from our society, and more about, the monsters are all of us in this room, depending on the day and how we treat each other and how we embrace each other.
That's a good answer. How are you gonna follow that, Kat? But you write villain romance, so that
They're
They're real villains,
Yeah,
too.
they're
Yeah.
real villains.
Yeah, so it's like these two, right? What I would like actual romances, like cozy, like actual lovable romances with characters that are in various stages of like with a human and sometimes not, and then there's people that are not people, like they're monstrous. And then you've got me over here writing actual villains. And the interesting thing about writing a villain romance where the guy stays the villain at the end and isn't redeemed, the challenge with that and is the mindset that you have to kind of go in with designing the character is like, okay, I always start with the guy. And I start by designing him. And I'm like, all right, who is this guy? What makes him a villain? How long has he been around? What is his motivation? What is he after? Is he trying to destroy the world? Is he trying to save the world in his own right? Like, who is he? What is his gimmick in sort of like a professional wrestling sense? Like, what is his shtick? Who is this dude? Because then I can build the world around him and I can sort of like build this cardboard box with this villain in it. And then I can design the girl that is going to ruin his fucking life.
And you do.
Yeah. And then I throw her into the cardboard box and I shake it and I see what the story is that falls out the other side. And so it really is designing the guy and then designing the girl that is just going to completely ruin him. And it's the designing and basically kind of trying to come up with a world where either they meet in the middle or she sort of becomes morally gray and it's a negotiation of like, how do we get to the end of the story? And I learned the hard way when I was writing my Dracula duet that like I never start a series without having the ending figured out. Because if I just go, because villains are so challenging to write, if I don't have the ending figured out, I will just paint myself into a corner and I've had to scrap entire series because I will get to like
You've made him a nice guy by chapter 3.
or worse. Or worse and be like, oh, this is how everyone dies, including her. It's a true strong adventure where everyone dies. And I'm like, and this is where people come at me with pitchforks. I just pulled a George R. R. Martin. Oh no. And it's like, so you get, I literally got to the end of the second Dracula book. It was supposed to be a 3-book series. I got to the end of it and I'm like, I can't end this in any particular, I cannot end this series. I had to nuke the first 2 books. That's when Julian Strand showed up out of nowhere and was like, how about me now?
Yeah.
And I know people who are new to Kat's books, like, please let us
Those
give you the
who do
testimony. Like,
I
they
love
are
him so much.
truly villainous, and it's not, you know, some books are like, I'm a villain, and he's not really, like, Kat's books are truly unredeemable, and all the way to the last page, and that's what I love about them.
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with my brain. I'm really
Or
not.
what's wrong with us as readers?
I'm really a nice person. Yes, hi.
Hi there. So, was something that I love about just reading some of your Mass Wonder series that you're in the middle of right now, you have a whole different world that you needed to paint what is good, what is evil, and what's in between.
Yeah.
Being a whole part of that to even work in the what's the villain and how does it work?
Yes. And then I had to make him the villain in a world where everybody hated. So not only is he the villain, he would be inexcusable on Earth, but now he's inexcusable in a world where people casually eat each other for fun because they'll wake up in the morning. So how do you make the guy that bad, right? So, and then be like, no, but everybody will still love him by the end of the series. And it's one of those things where nobody wakes up the villain of their own life story. And that's something you have to remember when you're writing a villain. They always think in their own minds that some part of them is excusable and some part of them is condonable. Like they know why they're like this. And even if they hate themselves because of it, they feel like they understand why they're that way. And being able to write them from a point of view of like, even if they despise who they are, they know who they are. And they woke up that morning and they're like, well, I am who I am and I'm going to continue to fight for who I am. Once you understand them from that point of view, it's really easy to write a love story for that. Because everybody can look at someone like that and find something about that part of the person and be like, all right, I can get behind that. My books, but therefore, are not for everybody. And then every once in a while I go a step too far, like with the slapping.
Yeah.
Tell us about the slapping. No, don't tell us about it.
Oh,
You
okay.
read it.
Well, the slapping isn't in there anymore, I got edited out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and there's a difference between, my readers are really into fantasy violence, and they're not into real world violence. And in Julian Strand, originally I crossed a line where the lead male character committed domestic abuse in basically the penultimate scene where he slapped the female character. Now, this was after possessing a kid and making him hang himself, and throwing the female character into a body pit and only going to go get her once she screamed so hard she passed out. And everyone was like, so he's hot though.
Like,
Yeah.
kids are so imminently possessable.
That's part is he makes sure that she understands the fact that the kid knew what was happening as it was happening. Like he literally watched himself hang himself and couldn't stop it happening. Like, and he makes sure that she understands this. But when he slapped her in an argument and then immediately went, I've become my abusive father and I'm now letting you go. People were the hate mail that I received.
Reached too far.
And I was like, what is that triggered people?
Well, that's real.
Exactly.
Like that happens.
Right.
If you're
That's
you know,
casual.
presenting in the world,
Right.
you've seen that. You've
Right.
lived
That's seen
with
that, and that's something that people have experienced. And it's like, I said this to a friend of mine a couple months ago, and it will ring in my head for the rest of my life. My books are for people who are sexually confused by Freddy Krueger, not Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
Like it. She's just losing it back there now.
Also reading The Massive Under right now, so I understand.
Stabby hands. So like, it is about the fantasy of the violence and villain with a capital V. It's for people who loved Dracula and people who are into the over-the-top monstrous villain and wanted to chase the darkness and not like wanted to, but don't want to be in an abusive marriage. Like that's the line in the sand, and I'd unintentionally crossed that line. And so I went back and edited that scene out. So now in that scene, he pulls back and almost slaps her and then stops himself. And it hits the scene exactly the same way. Nothing else had to change because I have no problem triggering people. I have no problem writing scenes that are gory or dark or what have you. I have characters that skin people alive. But Dracula cuts off a guy's hand, cooks it, and makes him eat it. Like it is a thing. But I didn't intend to trigger people there. So I was like, I will change that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So obviously, you know that we're pretty casual here, so feel free to throw in questions, but you guys can ask questions of each other as well, or just respond to something you've said, which is perfect. As you said, but I'll just keep asking questions until that happens. So, CM, I wanted to ask you about.
We got a question.
Do you have a question?
I have a question. So one, I just want to say it's because of your villain that I became friends with this girl.
Oh, yeah.
I was so taken by your not Jared.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. Wait, you had to know. That can't be the last time you've heard that.
Oh, dude, it's called Maze of Shadows. Holy. Dude, it's straight up. I followed the serial numbers off Labyrinth so hard on that one. Your dogs, yeah.
He's so deeply. I was like, hey, we need to start a book club to talk about this. Who stays the villain? And then it spread to our current four best friends. And so you brought us together. Thank you.
Friend group that reached the child is together.
Specifically, I actually did talk about that scene specifically. I fell down, it was 3-on-1 and I stand by my, I was pro and they
So
were
I
like,
had
I
a
don't
friend
know that.
message me, and another author actually, she messaged, she's like, I can't get past that scene. It's like, but he's getting a child. I'm like, well, as you
I
do.
understood where it came from, you're not
Right,
excusing
right.
it, and I felt like it. That
And I think that
obviously the
touches
group
on.
chat is still popping off.
I think that really touches on like something bigger and deeper, like the character motivation has to be there. Like you have to understand why these characters do what they do. And whether that's true in something that is more villain oriented, like your books, or even something cozier and like what Lillian and I write, like Tate is a character with very specific motivation, and no one is going to change that motivation in my books. Like his motivation is crystal clear. His motivation is bone deep, and all of his actions he can explain away because of that motivation. And like I feel like that cuts to the quick of why the monsters become more accessible to all of us, because when the character motivation is there, it's easy to read. Like you can get into that story, you can fall into that story, you can understand why the character is the way they are, who they are, why they do what they do. And it doesn't make a difference if they're a ghost or if they're a child skinning fae or if they are a gargoyle. It doesn't matter. But the characters have to be there first. And I think sometimes you can read a book that is clearly just like the monster, you know, the outline, and there's not a lot underneath, and it collapses in on itself. But like the characterization has to be there. Right.
Well, I think you all write really in-depth characters that we can get to know and like and want to see again, even if they're skinning people. I mean children, some children. No. No child deserves that. No child. Just have the pirate talking. Oh, that's right.
The thing that these two do though that I love, because I'm an avid reader of these two, they release a book and it's instantly read for me. Is the casual, like the subtle world building, because you two put so much cultural emphasis on your monsters. Like each of your monsters have such of a, like each type has a world and a type of a culture behind each of your monsters. That is just, but it's never the emphasis of it, but it's just there. And it's just so subtly woven into the story. But you know, like, here's an exposition dump on how these spider people work. And it's just subtly woven into this novella that is just otherwise just about this chick getting completely hosed by the spider dude. And I'm just like, but tell me more about his culture. This is as she's just getting, honked by, and I'm just like, but.
So that's the next
my
book.
Yeah.
It's so difficult for me.
I love.
You're so good. Yeah, like I put it in there because I know. But like it's still.
It doesn't seem like it's difficult for you.
Yeah. Oh, I mean,
It doesn't.
I don't know. I think
that's because again, it's in drips. It's not like it's like not like a page of exposition.
I need to
here's the
explain it.
history of the town. Or you're like, the bathhouse was built in. Like you don't need to do that. You give it to us in drips. And like the spiders, you know, his background and his culture. I am the the granddaughter of an immigrant family. And that's a part of my identity, and it's a part of his identity. But I don't walk into a room and say, "Let me tell you the story of the Sicilian people every time I go someplace new," because you don't need that. But you're still going to get, as the people who actually know me in this room, you're going to get it eventually. But yeah, I just feel like when you can give it in drips, it becomes organic versus. You've been bored on a
do you not
night.
like doing world building, or is that not?
It feels more complicated now because like when I write, it's so much about the interactions between the people and like, oh, he did this and she's gonna react that way, and then that other guy is in love with him, and like it's so into that, and then I'm like, ugh, and then other things are happening in the world right now. There's a political upheaval. And maybe someone gets kidnapped. We'll see.
But let me go back to that. Why you write monster romance then? Because like, if you wrote contemporary, you probably wouldn't have to do very much world building because we all live in the contemporary world.
But then you don't have that flexibility of being able to pull out that world building and say, hey, actually, she doesn't have cell phone service right now because of A, B, and C. See, reasons. And it's just keeping that consistent. Like, oh, if someone has a spell to do this, then that person doing this one trick over here isn't possible anymore. So like if you, my world building comes in like stages of like this book it's like this and this book it's like this. If I forget, it becomes a problem and a little bit more complicated since it's just all these standalones on top of each other.
We'll let you know.
The fact that your books are focused on the relationship first and the world like a distant third is why, like, whenever readers ask me, like, well, who are your favorite? Listen, I would say the sex. Yeah. Me like, well, who are the monster romance, authors that you love? I always say Lillian Lark and Kathryn Moon because it's like the focus is on the couple and the story, like the romantic storyline is the focus. And I feel like that's why we all get so much flack from like fantasy authors and fantasy romance authors, even though technically what we write is under the umbrella of fantasy romance. But like they're like, but where's the world building? I do not need to know like the first, middle, and last name of every acorn in the Shire. And like my eyes start to bleed if you just start to give me world building page after page after page. I don't fucking care. Get to the couple. Give me the romance. Give me the story.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually say something a little inflammatory. I think you actually do world building a lot better than world management.
Wait, can you say it louder?
Yes, well, I know, and I'm gonna get so just because like you tend to give it in drips and you give it when it matters.
It's more natural.
It's more natural instead of just like here's an exposition dump on elven armor. It's like
Stop getting a full like chapter and a half of what every little stone, tree, leaf, house, person, what everything looks like. It's very. It flows like water. It flows seamlessly.
Well, so the Masks of Under is currently going through a re-release. And in
Love your book.
Thank
It's
you.
so fun.
Which book is this?
The Masks of Under series. So it was originally released 5 years ago, and in the original edition, the first couple of pages was a list of every single character and their backstory. So it was a little paragraph of like, here's King Edu, and like this is his story, and like it was just a little descriptor of who everybody was. And people bounced off of that like a bug off a windshield because it was just exposition dump. And I realized it didn't matter and nobody cared. And this was information that nobody needed. And so in the re-release, I deleted that information and it is completely unmissed. And it was a mistake of a junior author. I was just like, oh, if I don't spell this out, if I don't give people this information, what if they don't remember who this character is? Then it doesn't matter and they shouldn't be in the story. Like, then I'm just a bad job. Then they're not a memorable character and they need to be deleted from the book. Like, that's on me. So, yeah, I just deleted that entire, like, 4 pages from the beginning, which is basically, because, they're like, let's put a map in the beginning and a list of characters. And I'm just like, gone.
One of my closest author friends is Elsie Winters. I talk about her series all the time. Literally every single one of you into this room is reading her books. She told me she was going to put a glossary. I'm like, I will hit you. And I will backhand you if you put a glossary in your book. And I think she did it too. At least the first one.
Oh, but then you have the explanation or whatever.
Like,
It'll be slap time.
But pronunciation.
yeah,
It's not gonna-
the slapping it.
do it.
Like, it almost happened at her house. I'm like, I will hurt you if you put a glove. Like, nobody cares. Dude, let them figure it out on their own.
I am writing a character that's not doing anything.
She can do whatever. She can absolutely do whatever she wants. Absolutely. She
I am
has me
writing a
threatening
character
her
right now.
regularly.
I'm writing a character right now that footnotes himself, but it's actually a joke.
Yeah.
Far from me.
That's funny.
Far from me.
Have you seen that recently where you can actively interact with your ebook or?
Yeah, but he talks to the reader, so he's
Oh, I love that.
his
Yeah.
name
The
is
Bart
Vile,
Man's
and he's
story.
like the ultimate, he's like the literary demigod of villainy, and he's all the villains rolled together. So when he's himself, he will footnote himself and talk to the reader, but nobody else in the book knows it's happening. So he'll be talking and it'll just be like 1, and it'll just be like a footnote, and he'll tell you like, go look this up, reader. And the other characters were like, what just happened? And I'll be like, nothing.
Bartimaeus
It's a little meta.
there was a monster trilogy. It's the Bartimaeus trilogy. You probably know,
Yeah.
where it's all footnoted, and he's narrating the book and he footnotes himself.
Yeah, he just talks.
It's great. It's fabulous.
Yeah, that's different, that's fun.
So I was gonna talk about happily ever after, I might get there, but I really wanna talk about sex. Because you said that was the second thing, right? And
Physics.
yes.
Logistics.
Although I didn't love this movie, The Shape of Water, you know, like, how do you figure it out? Especially as you're like adding appendages and tentacles and horns and blah, blah. What do you like block it out, your Barbies? I mean, I don't know. What do you do?
First, I want to know why you didn't like Shape of Water. Because but I have very controversial opinions about campus.
What? I just thought it was boring.
I think it's one of his stronger pieces, but I think he is an amazing visionary who tries to do too much, and he needs like a handler on every single project.
He needs someone to
Otherwise,
just be like,
yes, because Crimson Peak I was like so excited over, and now all I remember is like house, moths, bleeding snow.
that movie was like
So
designed for me. Like the pitch.
It's so stunning.
The pitch.
Stunning and forgettable.
Yeah, the pitch is like, Kat Kingsley, come see this movie.
Yeah.
And it was the biggest disappointment I've ever seen. in my life.
Huge. And I kind of felt the same way about Shape of Water, because I'm like, this is like monster romance, like on a massive scale. We have officially gone mainstream.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, it's kind of weird though.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. But
I've seen it.
Sorry.
yeah,
Yes.
Yes, that was-
should have been the character from Hellboy.
yeah.
Yeah, they should have just given us Abe Sapien in that movie.
Yeah.
Same actor, same characterization, everything.
So that's a perfect character.
Yeah.
I wanna jump in. You said it brought monster romance to the mainstream. Okay, here we go. Vampires. Are we monsters? Are we not? That was my.
That was one of her questions.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we have absconded with your chat.
I have no notes. I'm glad wherever people are.
Are we monsters or are we not?
Right.
It depends on the universe. For vampires, I would say Buffy, yes, because we have a physical change. I would say, I'm not gonna say the other movie, I'm gonna just interview. No, not monsters.
I consider it PNR. If it's
Yes.
witches, werewolves,
Yeah.
vampires, I consider it PNR.
Yeah, right.
If it's something that came out of a Tolkien story, I consider it monster. That's like kind of my
It depends.
Baldur's Gate, any creature that's featured in Baldur's Gate, we're towing into monsters. There is an overlap,
What if they
obviously.
fuck the werewolf in werewolf form?
See, thank you, asking the question. Did you know?
Yep.
I heard that on Amazon, they won't sell books that do that because they consider it bestiality. Yeah.
You just don't
You
advertise
just don't
that.
advertise it.
No.
So it depends.
I do have a werewolf.
If it's like 2 legs or 4 legs, like it literally is depends on like if it's like I'm a full wolf or if I'm just like
Partial. Partial mass. Partial matter.
Yeah.
right.
Who remembers the scene from Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula?
Yep.
With
Where-
Yes.
Wolf
Wolf
Vamp
Dracula.
and Lucy on the bench and
Yes.
like how many fantasies from that one scene. But I still consider it PNR.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's overlap, but I think it's when it's like all vamps, all werewolves, all witches, I don't necessarily consider that monster.
Like, we had that was the thing.
Right.
And then it's been around so long.
Monster
like,
romance isn't new. Like
Yeah.
nothing about monster romance is new. We've been telling these stories since stories were told. Like the story, it's just packaged.
Beauty and the
now.
Beast.
Beauty and the Beast,
It's
like
monster romance.
all of the animal bridegroom fairy tales that were being told, you know, in very fancily written books in the 1300s.
That was one of the first.
Absolutely.
I think the line is, can you bring them to Olive Garden without a bag over their head?
Yes.
And then do they have a weird penis?
Well, our garden is pretty open. It's pretty well
So like,
hidden,
is Phantom of the Opera a monster because he's disfigured?
So-
When you talk about I'm just gonna fucking run away with this, I'm super sorry.
You know what, actually, why don't we hold that until we have our discussion groups?
Because I have a lot of because that's the difference between like oh god, let's go teratophilia and exophilia, because teratophilia is considered a paraphilia. It is a love of the monstrous, and people are included in that. So what you love is actually the monstrous form, versus exophilia is you're in love with this monster who just happens to be a monster, but you're in love with the monster. So I think there is a real definite line in the sand there. Yeah.
I'm really enjoying how Lillian's sort of miming out her answers.
We are big mouths, Lynn. You gotta
You gotta smack us.
I do not have as many lines in the sand as everyone else. So do we need to put names? Do we need to put terms? But like, I mean, I get it for like classification. But like if a vampire like feeding like a sex scene is just like so very fucking different than what you would expect to read in like a Dracula book, then I'd be like, yeah, it's pretty like some monstrous stuff in there. Well, yeah.
I think of it all as a gradient, like it's a slide.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, two snake dudes. Yeah, which I read on the plane. I read snake sex on the plane.
Everything on your phone. It was the beta.
It was on my
version
laptop
of
next
my-
to two 70-year-old women who just come from a knitting.
Yes.
And they were like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Nothing."
As in Trans by the Basilisk, and she was a beta reader for it. So I was like, oh, maybe don't read this on the plane though.
Challenge accepted.
That was
Yeah, so there's like two snakes just going at it, right, with a lady, and then there's like
half man.
there's like vampires. And then there's like vampires up on the other side, because vampires are just like, you know.
Oh, that's a really funny question.
Well, how do you know the criteria? They can go out with a bag on their head and they don't have special equipment.
Yeah. And to me, unless they go crazy wacky bat form.
I was gonna say, if they bang the heroine in bat form, that would work for me.
Yeah, like if they go, the vengeful vampire, so I have like my creature feature, and I riff off the scene in the Dracula movie where he goes like monstrous and like just grabs from behind, because I'm like, everybody loves that scene.
Love it.
And so he goes like monster form and just like hoses her in that, and it's like, so that's a monster vampire
How are you
versus.
using the word hose? Because you used it twice now. You mean like not getting what you want?
No, I'm probably just like.
Yeah.
Just, yeah, just.
So Kathryn's book is
Well,
closed by the snake.
I
dude.
described
That's
someone
the
as
book.
going full Tupperware airtight mode and then sold a lot of copies of Tenebris after that. Yeah.
But I think you actually touched upon something.
Yeah.
Like important in what you said. It is a sliding scale. The lines in the sand can sometimes be blurry, and it's really all about what is the expectation. Like, is the expectation that it is going to be more of like a straightforward vampire story? Because that's what I consider PNR. Is the expectation that anything could happen, then it's that sliding scale of monstrousness.
The other thing I love about monster romance too is like when you write a vampire paranormal romance, because it's so common, people have an expectation in their head of like vampires are going to follow certain rules and werewolves are going to follow certain rules, and you can deviate slightly from those. But we've all written snake people, and they are all drastically different in the way that they function anatomically and socially. And that is perfectly fine and cool and awesome. And you get to just make up those rules as you go. Right, and that's just fun when you come up with these monsters, like, we're all going, well, you never probably gonna write a spider person because you're afraid of spiders, but like.
Really don't.
You know, we're gonna have spider people, and then Tiffany Roberts, who's a dear friend, has like her famous spider stories, and they're very drastically different than, you know, what I'm gonna write as a spider and what you're gonna write as a spider, and it's like, you get to just write your version of that monster. And you don't have to follow the same kind of tropes that you do, because if somebody picks up a book with a
There's no
vampire,
canon to follow for those.
there's no
Right.
expectations. People are be like, that's not my vampire. I wanted one that sparked, you know?
Yeah.
But isn't that, I mean, isn't that why paranormal sort of took off, because people felt like that was different, and people could do, like, if you think about the
Yeah.
shiny, you know, Twilight vampires, you could mess with it, but what you're saying is that you like the no barriers, you can just, your imagination just can do whatever it wants to do.
And it drives me bananas when, sorry, readers, when readers try to put a construct around what monster romance is and what it can be and what it should be, because it's an emerging genre. And to everyone's point, it's been around forever, but it is, as a retail category, it is still an emerging genre, and we are the ones who are in charge of that. So when I see people say, well, that shouldn't have happened in a monster romance, I'm like, what, but anything can happen in a monster romance, because there is, yeah, exactly, there is no, like you said, there is no canon for this, so we are not following anyone's rules, nor do we have to.
Okay, on that sort of topic, for all of you, is there a particular monster or trope or setup that you haven't done before that you really want to and haven't for some reason, or just it's, you know, deeper down the line, then you don't have to tell us any spoiler secrets?
Please do.
Or but you could if you wanted to.
Okay, so I'm gonna answer this first, because my answer is gonna be the boringest. I don't have favorite tropes, I don't have favorite monsters, I have favorite like character archetypes. So I don't necessarily go into building a story like, I haven't done enemies to lovers yet, so I don't typically build out my stories that way.
But you have a monster that you would like to write that you haven't yet?
I don't have favorite monsters, it just depends on what
Let's see.
yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
misunderstood.
No,
It's for turtle
that's
all the
fine.
time, yeah.
Yeah, it just
What the
depends
monster
on
that the
what,
story calls.
yeah, exactly.
Can I ask,
Exactly.
as a follow-up, and for everybody, is there a monster you wouldn't write? Spiders.
Spiders.
That's
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't know if that answer will change. I don't know if it has changed, but I don't think so.
Excellent.
I'm on the, like I said, the slow escalator ride to monster romance. I'm just descending into, fuck it. Because I really enjoy writing them, and it's just sort of like, okay, we're just going full cryptid now. Let's just get on that bus. And so I'm really enjoying it. When the outside matches the inside, and I'm just like getting, because like I was like, once you've written a vampire, how many more vampires can you really write before it's just like, cool, he has fangs again.
And then some
Now
more.
what? And so it's getting to be really interesting. A monster I wouldn't write.
I would already like to change my answer.
Go ahead, CM, she's still thinking.
The whole sentient object train. I'm not on it, because ultimately, like, this table is just gonna turn into a guy, and I find that like so dull. I don't want just a guy. So like the Wheel of Cheese romances.
Wait,
and-
Yeah, I'm not online enough yet.
I'm not on that train. It's fine if you like it, just don't expect it from me.
But if you had a sentient object, you could turn it into anything. You don't
I
have to make
could.
it a person.
That's true.
Your answer is just a guy.
Yeah, I just the monster you're not writing. Podium and he turns into a guy, like.
I thought she was pointing to me and I was like, what?
I don't She does not want this podium who turns into just a guy, like that's just.
I mean, I have that at home.
Is that not the reason that you rate this as opposed to like contemporary? Like that's, I don't have
as much distaste for contemporary and human romance as some of my peers do. But this is just more fun and the freedom. I like the freedom. And I don't want, so that is my answer. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with liking it, just don't expect it from me. I'm not on that train. I have cashed in my ticket and I'm walking somewhere.
So Lillian, do you wanna answer the question while Kat still thinks about what she would invite?
I'm going through the whole animal kingdom and I'm just like, slugs would be weird. Snakes would be weird.
Echidnas. Got this fine dogs. They've got like
Don't they have long tongues?
No, echidnas have like, it's like the peen has like these multi-prongs and they're all spiny.
That sounds totally up your alley.
I didn't say I wouldn't.
Oh,
Okay, I was just for options.
I love that you've researched echidnas.
I tried in someone's book one time and I'm not a drawer, so I'll let you guess how that turned out.
There are definitely shifters, like, animal parts that I'd be like, nah, I'm not trying to figure out how to put that up some lady's hoo-ha. Like, I'm not, there's a physics game there that's just not gonna happen.
Right up the old chicken hole.
Yeah. Like, there's not enough room in the world, no.
Your characters have multiple peens, so they're gonna have lots of chicken holes, right? Very complicated. Okay, I'm sorry, Lillian, what would that?
I don't think, like, I have themes that I would like to touch on in the future of like, but it's hard when my stories are a little bit more cuddly and to be like, oh, like I really love captive romance. It just might never happen, right? But for like monsters, I don't think of the monster first. It always comes later. As for I guess monsters that I wouldn't write, I mean spiders is a pretty like bugs are just like not really up high on my list at all. But I'm good without discovering. I'm sorry.
I sort of feel like you all can make anything sexy, if you put your mind to it.
It's a challenging thing, and I don't always love to write the challenges though. So
I texted my editor one morning and I'm like, hey, what's a worse word for this scene? Scurrying or scuttling?
What did you
I
say?
came up with scuttling.
You need more confidence. But a question, especially because you've written one, there are sometimes classic monsters, like a dragon. Is that constraining or freeing or both? Because there are associations with a classic, well-known monster?
like I can see, like, because everyone's like, oh, like people get mad at me if I go outside of canon. I don't know if maybe just the readers haven't found my email. But
Not
like
clearly on your website.
it is.
And now it is.
It is. But like no, like I don't feel that limitation at all when it comes to like it's about what like when I write my first draft, it's about what I want, not what other people want. So if I want to make like, oh, like that he has talon hands some of the time, then I have him have talon hands some of the time. And I'm just like, and the world building makes sense because there was no world building to begin with. Now we have world building and saying like, yeah, he can partially shift. That's the world building.
I want to see like a germphobic dragon with like gloves on.
There, Amanda Milo has not a dragon per se, but she's got a sci-fi romance where he has like an exoskeleton and is a germaphobe. He's very disturbed by the woman when he picks her up because she has clothing, and he's like, your body is falling apart.
Oh,
I would have to look that up. I'm gonna take one more question and then we're gonna do other stuff.
Yeah.
So we're having this conversation about tropes and not being limited by tropes, but inherently romance is the trope.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I know as a reader, I find it comforting, that's why I read romance, but is that ever, a limitation being in that I will get happily ever after?
That is not a limitation for me whatsoever. Even if I have the guy do like something that people are gonna get mad at, like my promise to myself is that the characters get to be happy in the end, right? Like it makes it like better when I do mean things to them, or that they're struggling internally with these things that are hard to struggle with. It's just like, no, they get their happily ever after, and like that's not a limitation because it's what I love about it. Because I am such a hard in the paint romance reader that I have a hard time reading outside of the genre almost at all. So you have a challenge on your hand, yeah. Like
So I'm a mix. I'm a little bit of a fantasy romance writer. So I do cross that line, and it is sometimes restricted because there are certain patterns that you fall into and you need to meet when you are writing romance. It isn't just about the ending. For example, again, Masks of Under, first books I ever wrote, I forgot to include the male love interest in the first book. He just didn't show up, really. Because I was like, well, he's not important until book 2. So I'll just have him show up in book 2, and that's when the romance starts. That's not how romances work.
No, I did the same thing.
Yeah.
In the Girls Weekend series, Ainsley doesn't really show up on page until book 2, and that's just the organic nature of the relationship.
Yeah.
And I didn't change it for anyone. Sorry.
Didn't work for me. So now when I went to do the rewrite, he has to show up in not only the first book, but like the introduction of the book. So now he's there from the first scene of the first book, even in just sort of like a dream mode, watching everything happen. And now it's funny because he's just literally eating popcorn, watching HBO, watching the female lead just get her ass kicked through the first book, being like, this is hysterical, look at her go. Like he literally just watches her commit home surgery on herself at one point and just like, this is fantastic. I tend to write a very gory, so in my long series that tend to be very dark, I tend to write a very gory scene in the first book because that's my sign to readers to be like, this is your point to get off the ride. Yeah. Because that's where I say it's going to get worse from here. If you can't handle Valroy skinning a kid or Lydia trying to take a tattoo off her arm with an X-Acto knife, get out. You don't want to finish this series.
But there are a lot of readers, I don't know about romance, but horror readers that would love that.
Yeah.
You know, so like that crossover.
I tend to blur the line of like horror and romance and dark fantasy, and which makes me a niche. I'm a weird.
Is horror romance a thing?
No, but I'm trying to make it a thing one book at a time.
It certainly is now. It's actually like for any of you like querying authors out there, like if you ever check like your curse, you cursed authors, querying authors. If you check like manuscript wish lists, like Mike Flanagan style, like cozy horror and horror romance is one of the most wished for things right now. The patients are looking for. Yeah. I feel like you fall like in that slot in between like horror romance and dark romance.
Yeah.
Like you're just like kind of
I would agree.
niched in between.
Which is weird because I kind of don't hit either.
Nope.
That's why.
Like between the horror romance that I've read, like goes like way hard.
Yeah. Right.
And your dark romance I read goes way hard.
Right.
But like you have this like fun little fantasy quarter.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Okay, so you have your
dial up the center. No, the happily ever after is never a challenge for me. Like same as Lillian, I am a romance reader and author through and through. It might take them a while to get there, but they will always get there. And I hate reading outside the romance genre. I used to read outside romance like voraciously, and like something clicked in my brain about 10 years ago. I'm like, I don't enjoy this. I'm just reading this music like I am.
Yeah. Or I only read this for the romantic side plot.
Yeah.
That was a big one where I'm like, wait, these are my favorite parts of the books. And then we have books that are just.
Right. It's like I never struggle getting to like with the ending part of the romance tropes. It's like all of the other expectations that I'm like, but I don't want them.
So if you had to recommend someone, not one of you three, because we all know you three right now, but who would you recommend to your audience here as a monster romance reader?
Elsie Winters, The Boundlands, you've
Mhm,
read,
mhm.
one of her
Yes.
if you like my books, you will love her books.
As monster
Not
romance?
as spicy,
Yeah.
but the world building is
Interesting.
chef kiss, they are super fun. She's the only one who gets my personal, like, if you like Camber Creek, you will love The Boundlands, seal of approval.
Do it.
Catherine Moon, gotta rep another Catherine.
Yeah.
If you like, Mail, K.M. Avery, who also happens to be my best friend in the world. And the reason why I am an author. She taught me to write, so.
Lillian.
Oh, Finley Fenn,
Yes.
yes, it's very much like it's some of the cozy aspects, but also some of the darker aspects, because it's in a fantasy. I don't actually read fantasy. Right, but I don't read fantasy as like a general, like when it's a fantasy romance, I'm like, meh, I could pass it.
So when I started reading her books, I nicknamed them the Orcs of Jizz Mountain. I told her that, and she thinks it's the best thing in the world. And I'm just like,
Mountain
Yeah.
Jizz, awesome.
Tell you how they clean it eventually.
Oh,
Yes, it's very interesting. And world building.
talk about world building. That has no
I
business
don't-
being a book that amount of smut.
I don't really read romance or even fantasy romance, but like I make exceptions for literally Finley Fenn and Kathryn Ann Kingsley, and those are the only exceptions I make.
We are just about on time because we do want to go upstairs and have you guys sign books for everybody. But I just want to say one last thing, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is that I feel like women's fiction is trying to creep into the romance genre to put the
Always
sales
does.
because it's such a
Always
juggernaut. So for any of your friends who are like, this is a romance and it's women's fiction, just tell them there's two things. The romance has to be the central story and it has to have a happily ever after. And you all know this, but those people are.
They don't get it.
Ugh.
Oh, please, it's been there since Danielle Steve.
But it seems like more
Always.
now where, I mean, it's just, anyways, that's just I'm gonna soapbox off of it, but,
It's so funny because you can't go the other way either. It's like when you're a female writer and you try to write fantasy and you have a romantic subplot, guess what? Your romance, where's your happily ever ending? Sorry.
I know, or the people that were like kind of, when our women's romance were like poo-pooing romance all this time, and now they're like, wait a minute, I've been there for money.
Yeah.
That's the worst motivation.
Yeah, you're seeing the dollar signs, and you're seeing the same thing in a lot of like the sub niches, like monster romance, like we are a cash cow, and like on the inside of the industry, like we call it a gold rush, like this is a gold rush niche, we are writing in a gold rush right now. I personally think the gold rush is winding down, but everyone that is writing in this niche right now is making money, whether or not they truly love the niche, whether or not they're really connected to it. Whether it's good or because, yeah, whether the quality, we talked about this at dinner the other night, whether the quality is there, whether the quality is good or not. And we're certainly not the only ones. Dark romance is in a gold rush right now. Like there are little pockets where things have exploded, and you're getting these authors who were including romance. And I've been saying this literally since my very first podcast back in 2021. Like you do not have to scratch the surface too deeply on Romance Landia to find some really ugly sentiments. And I think we've all put ourselves in an ivory tower for so long, being the victims of literary fiction and you know the bro fiction poo-pooing us, that we do the same thing to our own subgenres.
Yeah.
But you're finding so many of these authors who were making fun of these sub niches a year ago, jumping in with both feet as hard as they can to cash in. You're seeing the same thing with women's fiction, trying to get in on romance, on category romance.
I could do an entire panel on why dark romance, dark fantasy, monster romance, all, you know, like the darker ones are really popular right now. But I'm gonna let you go for now, and we'll be back here running a little bit late, 2 o'clock for a talk with Lillian and Kat. Thank you guys so much. This has been beautiful. And then we have to be our book share on
We find writing at current times, I Everybody talks.
I don't want to screw it up.
Okay.
Talk about that.